looking back, I have so much guilt to love somebody that's an addict and who struggles. That's a parent. I wanted to protect him and save him. But I know that you can't do that. You can't do that for anybody that doesn't want to do it for themselves.
All right, Jillian. Jillian, where'd you grow up? Where are you from originally?
I am from Mission, Kansas. I lived there most of my life. I did flee off to San Diego for a while, and then I was in Florida for a little bit, and no matter what coast I'm on, I wind up back home again.
Kansas is home.
Kansas is home.
Tell me about how you grew up.
So I grew up essentially the product of stigma and a lot of generational trauma rolled in. Both my parents, I would say, have a complex story that I won't get into because that's their story. But really, I think I'm a product of the wounds that are placed upon you without you having a choice. So many of the things, our character traits and things that happen to us, how we end up, are really not anything that we've asked for. It's how we've survived. My dad was a heroin addict. My mom didn't know it at the time when she married him. They married as teens. Young, naive love, living on the East Coast, D.C., and they were madly in love with each other. And they always, until he passed, cared about each other so much. But he was an addict. He could never say no to drugs. He tried, from what I understand, heroin for the first time when he was in Germany, stationed for the Army. And things just never changed after that. It went into any way he could get a drug. He didn't cheat on her with women. It was always his addiction. The final straw, I have an older brother, and when he was young and she was pregnant with me, the final straw was she had come home and he was passed out and there were needle marks in his arm. And she knew that if we were to have a chance that she had to leave. They didn't even have food for rent, to eat. He would spend all the money on drugs. She'd get calls all the time about him driving the wrong way down the road on the highway or being passed out on the ramp and have to go save him. So I think along the way, then she emotionally shut down. Once they got divorced, we just saw him every other weekend. And he did get remarried, and then that tragically changed my life once again. He married a woman who honestly hated me. I was 6 years old at the time. She hated everything about me, and I don't know how you can just hate a child. Maybe because I've always wanted to stand up for myself, but she was very emotionally and mentally abusive to me. She pretty much told me how terrible I was. Any chance she got, she would try and tell me that I was a spoiled brat, which I just couldn't fathom because my mom was a single mom trying to just provide for us and pay for us to eat and have a roof over our head. But when somebody tells you so many awful things about yourself over and over, you believe them. She would zip tie their doors shut so we couldn't get in, and they wouldn't even come out till 10 o'clock in the afternoon. There would be some weekends here or there where I never saw him at all because he would be strung out and hiding. So then she was just left to care for us.
Today's video is sponsored by BetterHelp. I work every day. I don't take sick days. Some days everything falls into place and other days it just doesn't. We've all been there. Life has its ups and downs, and that's just how it goes. When things feel heavy, having the right support makes all the difference. A therapist can help untangle external pressures from internal thoughts, turning stress into personal strength. Therapy is a great tool for learning how to process emotions, build healthy boundaries, and develop ways to cope with social anxieties and everyday pressures. It can also help you set goals that truly fit your life. Getting started is simple. You fill out a short questionnaire online, and BetterHelp will match you with one of more than 30,000 licensed therapists with diverse specialties and backgrounds. If the match isn't right, it's no problem. You can switch therapists anytime at no extra cost. And the best part, you don't have to wait for the right time. Any day can be the start of something better. So if you're feeling stuck, click on the link in the description or visit betterhelp.com/soft-white-underbelly to get 10% off your first month of therapy. Because taking care of yourself isn't about waiting for perfect. It's about showing up for yourself every day. Thank you for watching. And now back to the video.
Another little aspect is they were also foster parents. They took in girls, typically starting at the age of 13. They lived in this townhouse, and it was 5 flights of stairs. It was kind of long and tall. And my brother got this nice bedroom upstairs, and I was in the basement where the laundry room was and storage. Cold tile floors, there was no door. And they set it up, I guess what you'd think of as like a group home would be set up, bunk beds and trundle beds and stuff. And that's where I slept. And it wasn't like I felt uncomfortable being around these girls. I felt for them, but I also lost my innocence in that way too. They would tell me all the terrible things that happened to them, why they were taken out of their homes. What their experiences were in that house when I wasn't there. They would keep baby monitors down there so they could hear everything we were saying. If I wanted to call my mom or if I wanted to not be there, I'd be punished. She would start to hide the phones so I couldn't call my mom and tell her I was having a hard time. This one time, I remember we were playing a game of some sort, and she tried to call my brother out for something. Even though he's older, I always wanted to protect him. He just handled and carried himself so much better than I did. And I wanted to protect that. And I don't even remember what I said, but I stuck up for him. And the next day I was locked in her studio. She was an artist. I was locked in her studio for most of the day. I couldn't leave to go to the bathroom or eat or anything. So, then I transitioned back to my mom's house, and I'm built up with all these emotions that I need to release, but she doesn't do emotions. Until this day, she'll say, like don't cry, she can't do that. So I held everything in, and that's exhausting. I hated myself, which is really hard to say. I was angry, but I hid that. When I was old enough to say I didn't want to go there anymore, I stopped about 15. And I would say maybe around 19 was my dad's first suicide attempt. I remember I was at a party with my boyfriend at the time, and he kept calling my phone and I wasn't answering. When you love someone that's an addict, it's such a hard balance because you're so scared when they call your phone. You don't know what's going to happen. And you're so scared when they don't call your phone too because you don't know what's happened. I kind of had a bad feeling, and he had left a voicemail, so I stepped out of the room to check it. And you could barely understand what he was saying. He was slurring a lot of his words, and he was trying to apologize for everything that he's put us through, and pretty much said, I took all these things, and I'm sorry, and this is it. So I panic, of course. My brother had received the same message, and I called my mom, and her and my stepdad at the time called 911 and rushed down there. By the time they got there, the cops were there, and they were taking him out on a stretcher. I felt like I could never be mad at him because I loved him because he was my father. And I didn't want it to ever be my fault if he killed himself, so I didn't want to be angry. So anytime something like this happens, and he would be in the hospital for 72 hours, which was more often than the previous 2 attempts he had. Anytime he had ideations, he'd be checked in. It's just, I would always call him and tell him, you know, I love you. I don't judge you. I'm your daughter. I just want you to be better. And then it'd be the same story. He'd be sorry. He'd come out. And it'd be better for a little bit. But I still never wanted to upset him. I started internalizing a lot of my feelings. You know, none of my friends till this point, nobody knew that this was going on, because you want to protect your parents. If I were to tell friends, you know, I would be scared that their parents wouldn't want their kids to be my friends, that they would look at me, that I was the product of a junkie. We had a lot held against us. We had a lot to overcome. So after his first attempt, that's when I kind of started opening up a little bit about things. At that point, I had self-harmed for a handful of years just as my way to cope. I felt everything so deeply. I think when you come from childhood trauma, you're so aware of the world. You're so aware of your surroundings. And I was so aware of how good he was as a person, even though he had these demons, and everything was just so much. And I had a release. If you ask anybody that knew me then, I mean, they would probably be shocked. I knew how to present joy before I knew how to survive. It was like a way of acting, a way of pretending, a way to be seen positively. I never wanted the way I grew up. I didn't want people to judge me. I wanted them to see me for who I was and not for what I came from. So after his first attempt, I ran off to San Diego. I lived out there for about 3 years, and it was great because people didn't know my story. I could be whoever I wanted to be. It was a little wild. Young, wild, and free. And probably a little too wild and young and free. So after 3 years, I needed to come home. And when I came home, I moved back in with my mom. And I kept asking, like, why hasn't Dad come to see me? I haven't heard from him at all, you know, trying to ask my brother. And I could feel something was wrong. I knew that they were hiding something. He had his second attempt. And I still don't quite understand the whole story. He was living maybe like 30 minutes away in an apartment for work. And he ordered some knives and proceeded to cut his entire torso open. And I don't know who called the police. I don't know if he panicked and he called. But when they told me, he was in a psych facility at the time. And my mom forced me to go see him because she thought it was important to him. Everything was about preserving the fact that he was my father, so he loved me. It was almost like an excuse, like you can't feel these things, but he's your father. He loves you. He's your father. He doesn't want to hurt you. This is a disease. So none of my emotions and feelings were really checked in on. I Have you ever been to a psych facility?
Never.
Okay. It's just kind of like what it looks like in the movies. She had given me bread she made and wanted me to go up to the people. And they kind of humiliated me. They're like, you can't bring anything in here. And I'm like, oh, like, I just thought we were being kind. So I went back to see him, and he was so out of it. And he's like wanting to introduce me to his friends there. And, they're playing games. It was so hard to see, but I didn't want him to see my reaction. And then he's like, do you want to see my scar? And he starts to lift up his shirt. I'm like, no. And then I ran out and I threw up. It was just so much. Looking back, I have so much guilt to love somebody that's an addict and who struggles. That's a parent. I wanted to protect him and save him. But I know that you can't do that. You can't do that for anybody that doesn't want to do it for themselves. I just knew that I had to be better. I had to do something. I started writing in the 3rd grade, and I've kept all my journals. And looking back, some of the things that I thought about myself and my life were pretty horrific. But it always came down to, I don't want anybody else to feel like this. Like, I'm going to do something with my life. And I'm going to help people. Because people should know that they're not alone. You shouldn't have to feel like you need to be silent because you're scared of what people will think of you. Because those weren't my choices. I just was the product of them. So, fast forward, after I moved home, I met my husband 2 days after I moved home. We were engaged 4 months later and married 6 months after that. My dad was so happy. And on our wedding day, I didn't have him walk me down the aisle because he had to promise me 30 days sobriety. And he couldn't do it. And I have a lot of guilt knowing I'm his only daughter, and I took that away from him. But also, I had at some point start protecting myself. Thank you. So we have a honeymoon baby. And then you become a parent, shit gets real. So I put up more boundaries. You can't see him unless you've been sober for 30 days. And he would lie. I can tell somebody's on drugs by a mile away. I could probably tell you what drug you're on. It was the typical, he'd break out in sweats. He would start these withdrawals, but he was such a functioning addict. And he knew how to pull off what he said perfectly. And you just loved him. Nobody didn't love him. He wasn't mean. He wasn't like what you'd picture as the typical, if there is a typical drug addict. I probably sound like I'm stigmatizing it. But he did have such a good heart. And he was so excited to be a grandpa. We would try to get him to come to church, and he'd be sitting next to me in church, and he would start dozing off. He just put me in really fucking unfortunate situations. I try to look back at these good memories, he took me to see the Backstreet Boys, and I looked over him at the concert, and he was so high. His eyes were rolling back, and he could barely stand. I mean, so much of my life was just not being able to breathe. I suffer from extreme anxiety, not, the cute kind, where it's I'm nervous to take this test. We're every task in life. It feels like it's hard to do. Panic disorder. I really was like scared of everything. When I moved to California, people were like, there's no way Jillian is doing that. She'll be back in a day. She's scared of life. And I was, but I also wanted to run away from it. He had hepatitis C and COPD. He'd been a drug addict for years, so his body started shutting down. About the time my oldest son was 2, and my younger son was almost 1. The last few moments that we had, his dad came in town, and we had a nice visit with my grandpa and everybody. He just like looked hollow. He looked like his soul was already ready to leave. He came in. I was a hairstylist at the time. He came in and I gave him a haircut, not knowing that that was going to be the last time, but I know that he knew it was going to be the last time. My brother and I couldn't get a hold of him for like 2 weeks. And this is typical, hey, did you talk to Dad? No, but let me, I'll keep trying, or maybe I can reach out to so-and-so. Nobody was able to get a hold of him. And then finally, my brother talked to him, and he's like, yeah, sorry that I've been at MIA. I'm getting clean. I'm been in a facility trying to get sober. So, I mean, we believed him because he's had been sober or tried to get sober many times. A few days later, I had just gotten off work at the salon, and I went to a local restaurant my friend owns, and I was just sitting there, and this number comes across my phone, and it's so wild because being a hairstylist, you get numbers that call you all the time that you don't know. And yet I knew exactly what this number was. And the voicemail was one of my foster sisters. We did not get along at all, saying you need to call your brother. So I knew. I went out to my car, and I mean, really everything's fuzzy. I called my mom, and she's crying. I was just like, how did he do it? How did he do it? And she just said a gun. My brother didn't live far. And so, of course, I'm already damage control. I'm calling my work. Hey, my dad shot himself, so I'm not gonna be at work tomorrow. If somebody can help me with my clients, it's normal. And then I went to call my grandpa. I didn't know that my brother already had. And as these words are coming out of my mouth, I'm telling my grandpa that his son decided to end his life. And he had set it up for my foster sister to find him. He was watching her son at the time. He watched him a lot. The foster sister and him did drugs together, had the same drug dealer. And he left a sign on the door saying, don't let her son in. So she left him in the car, and she went in and found him. We couldn't go to his apartment for, I think it was 2 to 3 days after it happened. When we got there, he'd been robbed. They had gone, and not that he had much, taken everything. I didn't have material things that I wanted, but just to be able to go and get a sense of him. We walk in, he had had coffee that morning, he had had breakfast. He was back in school saying he wanted to be a drug counselor. It's I just wanted to crawl in his bed. I wanted to smell his sheets. On the couch where he shot himself, he had a picture of the grandkids next to it. There was just a sheet laying for all the blood. in the bullet hole in the wall. And I think we only had like 40 minutes. And that was it. And like all of his stuff was gone. Just everything was ripped. I've prepared my whole life for his death. And I knew it was going to happen. But when you get the call, that happens, you're just never actually prepared for it. Such a nice gesture of my stepmom. She set us up to go identify the body. So my brother and I went down to the morgue. At this point, I had my great-grandparents and my grandparents. I never lost anybody. So I didn't know what all this looked like. And we're sitting there. And my brother's like, you don't have to do this if you don't want to. And I'm like, you're not doing this alone. So I held his hand. And then I freaked out. I'm like, is half his skull going to be hanging off? Like, what am I going to see? And he's like, no, he's cleaned up. And it was a video. So I see him coming out of a freezer. And he's gray. And he's stiff-looking, soulless. And he had this white ace bandage wrapped around his head, holding it together. I said, that's him. That's my dad. And then life just like went on. Everything keeps moving when you grieve. And not like that, but then I have the stigma of the way he died to carry as well. I went back to work right away, and my clients would be like, I'm so sorry your dad died. How'd he die? And I would say suicide. And they're like, oh my God. And it's like, should I be embarrassed of this? I mean, all these people that you interview, these drug addicts, these homeless people, they're somebody's child. They're somebody's parent. They're somebody's sibling, somebody's friend. All these people are people who deserve love and empathy. And I just wish that people recognize that he was sick and he was in a lot of pain for a really long time. Doesn't make him a bad person. It made him a really shitty father, but he wasn't a bad person. So then I, in turn, started really battling. They have that saying that what you don't heal, like your body will show. Over the years after he passed, I started vomiting a lot. My panic attacks were bad. I'd break out in hives. I was just not mentally well. I had never healed. I still didn't have like the confidence in myself as a parent, as a wife, as a person. I had begun self-harming again. But now being a parent, I knew I had to do something. I just was so tired of living this way and feeling like this. So then I went to get help. I only lasted a day because when you go to a place like that, they don't separate you by gender. They don't separate you by what you're going through. So there's actually 2 men in active withdrawal while I was there, and it sent me deep. There's a lot of PTSD, so I left. But the best thing that happened was I immediately got set up with a psychiatrist, and he helped save my life. I got on the right medication for my anxiety and everything. He encouraged me to quit drinking. I'm 2 years no drinking. And I personally didn't have a problem, but I hid everything because I didn't want to feel it. And I needed to feel it. I needed to tell myself that those were my decisions, and that I could be better and I could do something. Eventually, I found an amazing therapist who I see weekly who's helped change my life. She introduced me to a story coach who, too, is helping change my life. Currently writing a book about my life. And she constantly tells me as I'm like, even coming in here, I'm like, is anybody going to want to hear this story? And she's like, yes, people need to hear your story. I am now, like I said, 2 years sober. I'm writing a book. I'd gone back to school to be, to work in school counseling and to be a private counselor as well. My main concentration is crisis and trauma, and letting people know that they're human and to have compassion and empathy. You know, when we have these struggles, I was stigmatized by my parents, by how I grew up, by self-harm, by how he died. And really it's struggling in general that's a stigma that society puts out there. They don't leave us a safe place to be loved. And those of us who struggle, it's not a liability. We just see the world differently. We just work differently. We work harder. I work every day to rewire my brain to be a better person and mother. I am an extreme mental health advocate now. I just never want people to feel alone. They're worthy of making their own choices, even if for so long their choices were taken away from them. They can make their choices now, and just to help empower and to let them know what an amazing thing resilience is when you can come out on the other side. But it's important not to just be a story of struggle and then triumph. It's important for people to hear all the messy middle parts that got you there too. So that was a lot of word vomit.
You did great.
I had been sitting on it for so long.
Is your brother, you and your brother are both kind of free from the same curse your dad had?
My brother's amazing, but I think something that's pretty lonely is we grieve very differently. He was a boy, so he had a better relationship with my father. Before he moved in with my stepmom, he lived with these two guys, and they had just pornography everywhere, naked women. I mean, it wasn't a safe place for a little girl to be. Things just seemed so much safer for him than me. He's open about how life was, but it's almost like we just don't talk about it. I think we experienced it very differently. They wanted to adopt him, but not me. Take him from my mom. Yeah. But I mean, we have so much love. When you go through something like that, you have this bond. But it's still very isolating that you can live the same experience with somebody and it be completely different. So, yeah, but we just live down the street from each other now, raising our kids close together, and yeah.
How do you feel this has changed your life?
Since being able to accept it and to heal, it sounds so cheesy, heal from your childhood womb, but it's so powerful. Even people who have a blessed life, there are things and decisions that people did in your generation of family that come out in how you do things. And so just being able to take your power back. And I have this confidence in myself that I've never had. And I have a fire that I've never had. And I'm determined to do things with it. I could make $2 an hour, but if I am letting children know that they're not alone, if I'm letting people know that they're safe, giving them a place to feel, I feel like all that pain is worth it. It took 40 years, but here I am, and my kids see it. I was teaching my 14-year-old about generational trauma the other day, and he looked at me, and he's like, "But you're changing you're changing the cycle. You're stopping it. And it's like, do you need anything else better in life? So.
That's wonderful.
Thank you.
All right, Jillian, thank you so much.
Thank you.
When I was designing the first Soft White Underbelly book, I realized that there were so many great portraits that weren't going to make it into that book. They just wouldn't fit. And once I saw how well that first book sold, I knew I'd have to design a second book. This second book is finally ready to ship. Like the first one, this book has a collection of some of the best portraits from Soft White Underbelly, accompanied by a quote from that person's interview. This book features another group of Rebecca portraits, as well as a collection of color images of the Whitaker family, and plenty of others. You can order yours for $125 or $150 for a signed copy at softwhiteunderbelly.org. Again, like the first book, once this book is sold out, I will not be printing more of them. The portraits are what Soft White Underbelly is all about, and these two books contain the best of all that work. Thank you for watching.